The grand jury in Georgia, the special grand jury, judge has released portions of its report. This is the grand jury investigating Trump's activities and his campaign activities in the state of Georgia after the election. The special grand jury is recommending indictments. It is a nothing burger. It is a waste of time. It is a waste of resources. It is a waste of everything. If you are a taxpayer in Georgia, particularly in Fulton County, Georgia, you should be furious that this is what you have. The judge has released this. We don't know the names, but one or more people possibly committed perjury, and they are recommending a recommendation that one or more people possibly be charged with perjury. That's it. Let me read you the key paragraph here. A majority of the grand jury believes that perjury may have been committed by one or more witnesses testifying before it. The grand jury recommends that the district attorney seek appropriate indictments for such crimes where the evidence is compelling. That's it. Let me give you the review of this. After the November 2020 election, with all the shenanigans and all the accusations of other shenanigans, Donald Trump called Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, and said Raffensperger needed to find him 11,000 some odd votes to win the election. He was convinced they were there. He had been convinced by others the election was stolen. No one has found proof of significant enough election violations in Georgia. There have been some. No one found enough proof that it overturned the election. And the Trump campaign themselves misunderstood the law. They wanted 11,000 some odd votes of the Democrats either to be thrown out or to be found for the GOP. You actually needed 30, 40,000 votes. I think 40 some odd thousand votes, because you had to throw out sufficient ballots to get cast down in the election. Well, about 30 some odd thousand people refused to even vote between Biden and Trump. You can't just presume votes were cast for one side or the other. You got to, under Georgia law, there's a mathematical formula you got to use. It amounted to 40 some odd thousand votes. There were not enough sufficient to throw out the election. They did find some problems. There were errors made. There were human errors made. There were some people who didn't vote, but they couldn't even find 11,000 people, despite wild claims, even from some outside groups, that there were massive amounts of people who voted. They looked. They couldn't find any. This special grand jury looked. Now, here's this thing. The special grand jury cannot make indictments. What the special grand jury was impaneled to do was to hear evidence and form a report and decide whether or not another grand jury should have enough information. The regular grand jury should have enough information to indict people. Now, why do they do this? Well, a grand jury works for about 6 months or so, and a grand jury looks at every crime that's being committed to indict under the laws in the state of Georgia. For felonies, grand juries are involved, and those grand juries are looking at so many things. A grand jury would have been overwhelmed with this one thing, and all the other crimes in a county would have had to be put aside. So a special grand jury can be convened to do all of the investigatory work and come to a conclusion that possibly a crime has been committed. And if so, they distill it down to its essence, say, here are the people you want to look at, and go to the regular grand jury, present them this evidence, and let them decide whether or not to indict. That's what happened here. With much fanfare, the prosecutor for Fulton County, Georgia, that's where Atlanta is. It's the capital of Georgia. It's the county seat is Atlanta. With much fanfare, the new district attorney, she was newly elected. She's actually far better than the old guy, who was very corrupt. He was thrown out of office by the voters. She used to work in his office. She challenged him because of corruption. She won. With great fanfare, she was going to make her name in Democratic politics by pursuing Donald Trump and his minion. They decided to look at 6 areas of criminal law. 1, criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. 2, making false statements to state and local governmental bodies. 3, conspiracy. 4, racketeering. 5, violation of oath of office. And 6, involvement in violence or threats related to election administration. That's it. Again, this is very important to understand how this is such a nothing burger. What a waste of money this whole thing is. They wanted to look at criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. Not that the election was stolen from Trump, but that Trump's team tried to steal the election and commit election fraud. Making false statements to state and local governmental bodies, perjury. Conspiracy, racketeering, violation of oath of office, involvement of violence or threats related to election administration, essentially intimidation of election officials. They looked at all of that. They interviewed 75 people. They interviewed Senator Lindsey Graham. They interviewed Governor Brian Kemp. They interviewed Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. They interviewed Rudy Giuliani. They interviewed a whole lot of people. And they've recommended perjury charges. I'm told possibly up to 4 people, 1 or more, they actually say. It's not a big deal. The panel recommended the Fulton County District Attorney's Office seek indictments against those people where the evidence is compelling. It did not specify the witnesses. The special grand jury said it believed 1 or more witnesses it heard may have committed perjury. Now, I said 4. I don't actually, maybe I misread something. Maybe it's because it was 4 pages of the whole thing released. They prepared a 9-page final report. 4 of them were released. They interviewed 75 witnesses. They interviewed White House aides. They interviewed Trump advisors. Just to give you a sense of the people that they looked at in the state of Georgia, they looked at Sidney Powell, who did not show up for her testimony. They interviewed Rudy Giuliani. They did not interview Jackie Pick Deason. She was a lawyer. They interviewed David Schaefer, the chairman of the Republican Party. They interviewed Mark Meadows. They interviewed Mike Flynn. They interviewed Jenna Ellis, John Eastman. Sidney Powell did not show up for her testimony. They interviewed Brad Raffensperger, Brian Kemp, Lindsey Graham, Cassidy Hutchinson, Ruby Freeman, Francis Watson. Francis Watson was the chief investigator of the Secretary of State's office. Ruby Freeman was harassed, maligned, and threatened because Trump supporters concocted a conspiracy that she was stealing the election, and she did not. So who possibly could be charged here? We don't know. But here's what we do know. If they're going to charge 1 or more people with perjury, it can't be Donald Trump. And that's what this whole thing was about. It was to get Donald Trump. They were finally going to get the SOB, and they didn't. They did not get him. They didn't come close. I mean, the things they were looking at. They were looking at conspiracies and racketeering and violations of oath of offices and intimidation and threats of violence. They were looking at all of these things, and all they got is perjury from some unknown people. So what will happen is the district attorney will have to take this to a real grand jury, unseal the evidence so that they can review who possibly committed perjury and then charge those individuals. Rudy Giuliani is a target in the case. David Schaefer, the chairman of the state GOP, is a target of the case. David Schaefer, the chairman of the GOP, last week said he's going to step aside now. He's not going to continue on as chairman. He's not going to run again after all. I don't know that this is related or not. But this is really a waste of our time and a waste of resources. And here's the thing. So they went through a big deal of should they release it, should they not release it, should they release a portion of it? And they dithered and dithered and dithered. And then on Thursday, right before I come on air, by the way, Judge McBurney, thank you for making sure you released it before noon on Thursday so the most listened to radio voice in Atlanta would have the information to be able to cover it. I do appreciate that. But they released it right before my show so that I can review it. I read it, And it's 4 pages. Do you know the only thing they redacted? They redacted the names of the members of the grand jury. That's it. I mean, it would have been great if they were like redacted the transcripts that showed perjury and everything was just redacted and you had a massive documents. But no, it's just 4 pages. It's the introduction of what they did. It's the paragraph of recommending indictments against some who possibly perjured. We don't know the names of who they think committed perjury. We don't know. 75 witnesses. We have no idea. We can make some guesses. The odds are they're not trying to accuse Brad Raffensperger of perjury, and the odds are they're not trying to accuse Brian Gibb of perjury. The odds are they're not trying to accuse Lindsey Graham of perjury. Given the people they interviewed, from Mike Flynn to Jenna Ellis to Mark Meadows to Rudy Giuliani to David Schaefer and the various electors. By the way, Burt Jones, he's not going to be involved either, probably, because Burt Jones, the lieutenant governor, the district attorney said, you can't. The judge told the district attorney, you got to avoid him. Why? Because she held a fundraiser for his opponent during the election. So the lieutenant governor of Georgia, maligned in this investigation, he's not going to be charged with perjury. She's not allowed to touch him. I don't think she even was allowed to interview him. But could it be the chairman of the state party? Possibly. There was a judicial ruling a while back that he and the other electors, the fake electors, that they couldn't have the same attorney anymore because it could represent a possible conflict of interest. That he maybe so. Rudy Giuliani, possibly so. Rudy Giuliani got way out ahead of his skis. I doubt Mark Meadows. Mike Flynn has this history. Maybe it's Mike Flynn. But it's not going to be Donald Trump. And that was the whole point. That was the whole national obsession here. They wanted to get Donald Trump. They wanted to take down Trump. And yet again, they've missed. Teflon Don, they can call him. They've missed. They went through all of this. They spent all of this money, extraordinary sums of taxpayer dollars in a county struggling to make ends meet. They spent all of this money for a handful of perjury charges. That's it. And it's not even charged yet. They believe there's sufficient information to charge one or more with perjury. They believe there's sufficient evidence. That's it. That's what we've all been waiting for. It took them this long to do. A judge had to bless releasing it. They released it on a Thursday morning. They could have had this thing wrapped up a while back. The left will stop at nothing to put Donald Trump under the jail, and the only people they're burying are the taxpayers in a pile of debt to get it done. This was farcical, nonsensical. It was a waste of taxpayer dollars, a genuine, real waste of taxpayer dollars just to get a handful of possible perjury charges against some unknown people when you really wanted to take out Trump and you're not going to do it. I realize they want to stop the man. I realize they're hell-bent on making him pay for the audacity of beating Hillary Clinton. And they concoct all sorts of other things to say he did all these other things. But here you have a grand jury that investigated 75 witnesses. Intimidation and violence and threats of intimidation and violence. They're not charging Trump with that. Racketeering, they're not charging with that. Conspiracy, they're not charging with that. Violation of an oath of office, they're not charging with that. They're not charging him with anything. They're not even charging him with perjury. They can't charge him with perjury. They're not charging him for any of the highfalutin things that all the talking heads on MSNBC and a lot of the ones on CNN said, there's no doubt he did these things. Well, you couldn't convince a grand jury of people in Fulton County, Georgia, that Donald Trump did these things. You've wasted all of our time and all of our money to nurse a grudge that goes back to one core thing. He beat Hillary Clinton, and you can't get over it.